The morning fog hung thick over Buckingham Palace as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell received the most unexpected phone call of her career. On the other end of the line was James Harrison, a former royal guard whose voice trembled with nervous energy. He claimed to have information that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. Sarah had worked countless cases involving the wealthy and powerful, but nothing had prepared her for what James was about to reveal. The 42-year-old detective had built her reputation on her ability to remain calm under pressure, yet something in the guard's tone made her pulse quicken. James Harrison had served the royal family faithfully for 15 years. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned. He had been present during some of the most significant moments in recent royal history, always maintaining the strict code of silence that came with his position. But what he had discovered in the past few weeks had torn at his conscience until he could no longer remain silent. The story began 3 months earlier, when James was assigned to oversee the cataloging of items in one of the palace's storage facilities. It was routine work, the kind of tedious task that often fell to senior guards during quiet periods. The facility contained personal belongings from various royal family members, some dating back decades. As James worked through boxes and carefully labeled containers, he came across a collection that made him pause. The items were unmistakably connected to Princess Diana. There were personal photographs, handwritten letters, jewelry pieces, and clothing items that had never been publicly displayed or mentioned in any official inventory. What troubled James wasn't the existence of these items, but rather what he observed happening to them over the following weeks. He noticed that certain pieces would disappear from the collection, only to reappear days later with different catalog numbers. Sometimes items would vanish entirely, their absence explained away by vague references to redistribution or archival reorganization. His suspicions deepened when he overheard a conversation between two palace staff members discussing upcoming private sales and exclusive auctions. The whispered conversation mentioned substantial sums of money and the need for absolute discretion. When James tried to learn more about these sales, he was met with evasive answers and sudden changes of subject. The breakthrough came when James discovered a hidden room within the storage facility. Access required a special key that he had been given for emergency purposes, but had never needed to use. Inside, he found a sophisticated operation that looked more like a high-end auction house than a royal storage area. Display cases showcased Diana's most precious belongings. There were evening gowns she had worn to charity galas, personal letters she had written to friends, and even some of her children's artwork from when they were young. Each item was professionally photographed and accompanied by detailed authentication documents. James realized he was looking at a carefully orchestrated scheme to sell Princess Diana's personal collection to private collectors. The items weren't being sold openly, but through exclusive invitation-only auctions that attracted wealthy buyers from around the world. The operation was so discreet that even most palace staff were unaware of its existence. What shocked James most was the identity of the person overseeing this operation. Through careful observation and document examination, he discovered that Queen Camilla was not only aware of the sales, but was actively directing them. Her personal secretary handled the logistics, while trusted dealers managed the authentication and bidding processes. The financial records James uncovered revealed that millions of pounds had already been generated through these sales. The money wasn't going to charity or royal funds, but appeared to be flowing into private accounts controlled by individuals close to Camilla. The entire operation seemed designed to profit from Diana's memory while keeping the sales completely hidden from public view. James struggled with what to do with this information. His loyalty to the crown ran deep, but his sense of justice was equally strong. He thought about Prince William and Prince Harry, Diana's sons, who had no idea that their mother's most personal belongings were being sold to strangers. He imagined how devastating this revelation would be for them, and for Diana's millions of admirers worldwide. For weeks, James tried to convince himself that there might be an innocent explanation. Perhaps the sales were authorized for legitimate reasons he didn't understand. Maybe the proceeds were secretly going to Diana's favorite charities. But the more he investigated, the clearer it became that this was a deliberate scheme to monetize Diana's legacy for personal gain. The final straw came when James witnessed the sale of Diana's personal diary from 1996, the year before her death. The leather-bound book contained her private thoughts during one of the most difficult periods of her life. Watching it being packaged for shipment to an anonymous buyer filled James with such anger and sadness that he knew he could no longer remain silent. James began secretly documenting the operation. He photographed auction catalogs, copied financial records, and recorded conversations when possible. He was careful to avoid detection, knowing that discovery would mean not only the end of his career, but potentially serious legal consequences. The evidence he gathered painted a picture of systematic exploitation of Diana's memory. Items that should have been preserved for historical purposes or returned to her sons were instead being sold to the highest bidders. Some pieces went to legitimate collectors who appreciated their historical significance, but others ended up in the hands of people who seemed to view them as mere trophies. As James prepared to make his revelations public, he knew there would be consequences. His career with the royal family would be over, and he would likely face legal challenges from powerful people who wanted to keep this scandal buried. But he also knew that Princess Diana deserved better than to have her memory commercialized, in secret. The detective listened intently as James finished, explaining how he had discovered her contact, information, and why he had chosen her to help expose this scandal. Sarah realized she was being offered the story of a lifetime, one that would require careful investigation and absolute courage to pursue. The evidence James had gathered was compelling, but taking on the royal family would be unlike anything she had ever attempted. As their initial phone conversation ended, both James and Sarah understood that they were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever. The truth about what was happening to Princess Diana's collection was too important to remain hidden, regardless of the personal cost they might face in bringing it to light. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the evidence that James Harrison had provided. The documents, photographs, and recordings painted a disturbing picture that went far beyond what she had initially imagined. The scope of the operation was vast, involving not just Diana's personal belongings but also a network of dealers, auction houses, and wealthy collectors who operated in complete secrecy. Sarah's investigation revealed that the auction operation had been running for nearly 2 years. It had started small, with just a few pieces of Diana's jewelry being sold through private channels. But as word spread among elite collectors about the availability of authentic Diana memorabilia, the operation had expanded dramatically. The auction house facilitating these sales was located in a discreet building in London's prestigious Mayfair district. From the outside, it appeared to be just another upscale art gallery, but inside, a sophisticated network managed the sale of royal artifacts to clients, who paid premium prices for absolute privacy and authenticity. Guarantees James had managed to infiltrate one of these exclusive auctions by posing as a maintenance worker. His hidden camera captured footage of wealthy bidders competing for Diana's possessions, with the same enthusiasm they might show for rare paintings or vintage wines. The atmosphere was celebratory, with champagne flowing freely as people bid hundreds of thousands of pounds for items that had once belonged to the people's princess. What made the situation even more troubling was the systematic nature of the operation. Camilla's team had developed detailed profiles of potential buyers, targeting individuals who were known to collect royal memorabilia and had the financial means to pay extraordinary prices. Some buyers were legitimate collectors who planned to eventually donate their purchases to museums. Others seemed motivated by a desire to own pieces of Diana's life for purely personal reasons. The financial trail that Sarah uncovered revealed payments flowing through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. The complexity of these arrangements suggested that significant effort had been made to hide the money's ultimate destination. Her forensic accounting background helped her trace some of these funds, and what she discovered was deeply concerning. Much of the money appeared to be funding Camilla's personal lifestyle and various private projects that had no connection to official royal duties. There were payments for expensive renovations to properties that weren't officially royal residences, purchases of artwork and luxury goods, and substantial transfers to accounts belonging to Camilla's family members and close friends. Sarah also discovered that some proceeds were being used to finance influence campaigns designed to improve Camilla's public image. Public relations firms Social media consultants and even some journalists appeared to be receiving payments that could be traced back to the Diana auction proceeds. The irony was devastating. Diana's own belongings were being used to fund efforts to rehabilitate the reputation of the woman many blamed for the breakdown of her marriage. James provided Sarah with a particularly damning piece of evidence. A recorded conversation between Camilla and her private secretary, discussing which of Diana's items would generate the most money. In the recording, Camilla could be heard laughing as she described how sentimental fools would pay anything for authentic pieces of Diana's wardrobe. The callousness in her voice was shocking even to Sarah, who had heard many criminals discuss their crimes with disturbing detachment. The conversation also revealed Camilla's awareness that what she was doing was wrong. She specifically instructed her secretary to ensure that William and Harry never learned about the sales, acknowledging that their discovery would cause unimaginable damage to the royal family. She also expressed concern about media discovery, noting that public revelation would likely force her to step down from her royal duties. As Sarah delved deeper into the investigation, she uncovered evidence that other royal family members might be involved. While there was no indication that King Charles was directly aware of the auctions, some palace staff members were clearly complicit in the operation. Security personnel had been reassigned to ensure that certain areas of the palace remained private during the cataloging and removal of Diana's items. The investigation also revealed that some items being sold were of extraordinary historical significance. Diana's personal correspondence included letters from world leaders, celebrities, and other members of the royal family. These documents provided intimate insights into Diana's thoughts and relationships that were never meant to be public. Selling them to private collectors meant that crucial pieces of British royal history were disappearing into private collections where they might never be seen again. One of the most heartbreaking discoveries was the sale of items that had clear, sentimental value to Diana's sons. There were childhood drawings that William and Harry had made for their mother, photographs from private family moments, and even some of Diana's personal jewelry that she had specifically mentioned in letters as items she hoped her sons would one day give to their own wives. Sarah realized that this wasn't just about money or personal greed. The systematic dismantling of Diana's legacy seemed designed to erase her memory and reduce her impact on the royal family's future. By selling off her possessions, Camilla was ensuring that there would be fewer physical reminders of Diana's influence and popularity. The detective's investigation also uncovered evidence of international buyers who were purchasing Diana items for reasons that went beyond simple collecting. Some foreign buyers appeared to be acquiring pieces as potential leverage or blackmail material, particularly items that contained private information about the royal family or British government officials. James informed Sarah that the pace of sales had accelerated recently, suggesting that someone might be concerned about potential discovery. Entire collections were being moved out of the palace at night, transported in unmarked vehicles to secret locations where they could be prepared for sale without detection. The most disturbing aspect of the operation was its brazen nature. Despite the secrecy surrounding the sales themselves, the people involved seemed confident that they would never face consequences for their actions. This confidence suggested either powerful protection or a belief that the royal family's influence would shield them from any serious investigation. Sarah knew that she was approaching a point where she would need to make some difficult decisions about how to proceed. The evidence was compelling, but taking action against senior members of the royal family would require careful planning and possibly assistance from other law enforcement agencies. She also had to consider the potential impact on James, whose courage in coming forward had made this investigation possible. As she prepared for her next meeting with James, Sarah reflected on the magnitude of what they had uncovered. This wasn't just a crime story. It was a betrayal of public trust that struck at the heart of what the royal family claimed to represent. The woman who had become queen through marriage was systematically destroying the legacy of the woman whose tragic death had made that marriage possible. The breakthrough in Sarah's investigation came when she decided to go undercover. Using her connections in the art world, she managed to secure an invitation to one of the exclusive auctions under the identity of a wealthy collector from Dubai. The elaborate cover story took weeks to establish, but it gave her the opportunity to witness the operation firsthand and gather evidence that would be impossible to obtain through traditional investigative methods. The auction was held in a converted townhouse in Belgravia, chosen specifically for its discreet location and private parking that allowed buyers to arrive and leave without being photographed. Sarah arrived in a rented Bentley, dressed in designer clothing that had cost more than her monthly salary. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully planned to help her blend in with the other wealthy attendees. The auction room itself was elegantly appointed, with soft lighting that created an intimate atmosphere. About 30 people were present, each having been personally vetted before receiving an invitation. Sarah recognized several faces from newspaper society pages, including a Russian oligarch, an American tech billionaire, and a Middle Eastern prince who was known for his extensive art collection. What struck Sarah most was the casual atmosphere surrounding the sale of Diana's possessions. The auctioneer treated each item as just another valuable collectible, with no acknowledgement of the emotional significance these pieces held for millions of people worldwide. The bidders showed no hesitation about competing for personal items that had never been intended for public sale. The first item offered was a simple pearl necklace that Diana had worn to several public events. The starting bid was £50,000, but within minutes the price had escalated to over $200,000. Sarah watched in amazement as wealthy individuals casually raised their paddles, treating the auction like an entertaining evening out, rather than the systematic dismantling of a beloved figure's legacy. As the evening progressed, more significant items were offered. A handwritten letter from Diana to a friend discussing her struggles with the royal family sold for nearly £500,000. The buyer was a private collector from Switzerland who already owned several pieces of royal memorabilia and seemed to view Diana's letter as the crown jewel of his collection. The most shocking moment came when one of Diana's personal diaries was offered for sale. The leather-bound book contained her private thoughts from the months following her separation from Charles. The auctioneer described it as an unprecedented insight into the mind of the people's princess during her most vulnerable period. The bidding was fierce, with the final price reaching an astronomical £750,000. Sarah used a hidden camera to record the proceedings, but she was careful to avoid detection. The security at the auction was sophisticated, with multiple guards positioned throughout the room and what appeared to be electronic surveillance equipment monitoring the proceedings. It was clear that the organizers were taking significant precautions to protect both the buyers' identities and the operation's secrecy. During a break in the proceedings, Sarah overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst suspicions. Two of Camilla's associates were discussing future auctions and the need to accelerate the sales schedule. One mentioned concerns about increased scrutiny and the possibility that someone might be asking questions. This suggested that Camilla's team was aware that their operation might be under investigation. The conversation also revealed plans to expand the operation beyond Diana's belongings. There was discussion about selling items that had belonged to other deceased royal family members, including some pieces that had historical significance dating back centuries. The casual way these individuals discussed dismantling British royal heritage for personal profit was deeply disturbing. Sarah's investigation took a dangerous turn when she was approached by a man who introduced himself as Marcus Webb, one of Camilla's security advisors. Webb seemed suspicious of Sarah's presence and asked detailed questions about her collecting interests and how she had learned about the auction. Despite her carefully prepared cover story, Sarah could sense that Webb wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. The encounter with Webb forced Sarah to realize that her investigation might have been detected. She carefully extracted herself from the conversation and left the auction early, claiming a sudden illness. As she drove away, she noticed a car following her, confirming her suspicions that Camilla's team was now aware of potential threats to their operation. The next day, James contacted Sarah with alarming news. Palace Security had conducted an unexpected review of all staff, with access to the storage facilities where Diana's items had been kept. Several guards had been questioned about missing items and potential security breaches. James was concerned that his activities might have been discovered and that his position was in jeopardy. Sarah knew they needed to act quickly before the evidence could be destroyed or the operation could be moved to a location beyond their reach. She began preparing a comprehensive report that would document everything they had discovered, knowing that once she submitted it to her superiors, there would be no turning back. The report detailed not only the auction operation but also the broader pattern of exploitation that surrounded Diana's memory. Sarah had uncovered evidence that some of Diana's charity work was being undermined by people who claimed to be continuing her legacy while actually profiting from her reputation. The systematic nature of this exploitation suggested a coordinated effort to diminish Diana's lasting impact on the royal family and British society. As Sarah worked on her report, she received an unexpected phone call from an investigative journalist named Catherine Mills. Catherine had been researching irregularities in the royal family's financial disclosures and had noticed some anomalies that might be connected to Sarah's investigation. The journalist had connections within the palace that could provide additional evidence, but she was also concerned about the potential backlash from exposing such a sensitive story. The collaboration with Catherine opened up new avenues of investigation. The journalist had discovered that several auction houses and art dealers had been receiving unusual commissions for work involving royal memorabilia. Some of these transactions appeared to violate regulations governing the sale of national heritage items, potentially making the operation illegal under multiple British laws. Catherine also provided Sarah with evidence that some of the auction proceeds were being used to influence media coverage of the royal family. Payments had been made to several publications and online platforms that had published positive stories about Camilla, while simultaneously running pieces that were critical of Diana's legacy. The coordination of these efforts suggested a sophisticated public relations campaign designed to reshape public opinion. The investigation revealed that the operation's scope extended far beyond what Sarah had initially imagined. This wasn't just about selling Diana's belongings. It was part of a broader effort to control her narrative and ensure that her influence on the royal family's future would be minimized. The money being generated through the sales was funding multiple projects designed to elevate Camilla's status while diminishing Diana's memory as Sarah and Catherine prepared to go public with their findings. They knew they were taking enormous risks. The royal family's power to protect itself and punish those who challenged it was considerable, but they also understood that the truth about what was happening to Diana's legacy was too important to remain hidden. The people's princess deserved better than to have her memory commercialized by the very institution she had spent her life trying to reform. The morning Sarah and Catherine decided to go public with their investigation marked the beginning of the most intense period of both women's careers. They had arranged to meet at a secure location to finalize their evidence and coordinate their approach. However, as Sarah arrived at the designated cafe, she immediately sensed something was wrong. James Harrison was supposed to join them with additional evidence he had gathered overnight, but he was nowhere to be seen. When Sarah tried calling him, his phone went directly to voicemail. Her attempts to reach him at his home were equally unsuccessful. A growing sense of dread filled Sarah as she realized that their key witness might have been compromised. Catherine arrived with disturbing news of her own. Her editor at the newspaper had received a phone call from someone claiming to represent the royal family's legal team. The caller had made vague but unmistakable threats about the consequences of publishing unsubstantiated allegations against senior royal family members. The editor was now having second thoughts about running the story, despite the compelling evidence Catherine had gathered. The pressure on both women intensified throughout the day. Sarah received a call from her supervisor, ordering her to report to headquarters immediately for a meeting with senior officials. When she arrived, she found herself facing not only her own superiors but also representatives from the Home Office and what appeared to be members of the Royal Protection Unit. The meeting was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her law enforcement career. The officials were polite but firm in their message. Her investigation was interfering with matters of national security and needed to be terminated immediately. They claimed that foreign intelligence services were monitoring the royal family's activities and that any public scandal could compromise ongoing security operations. Sarah was told that her evidence would be classified and sealed, and that any attempt to discuss her findings publicly would result in prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. The threat was delivered with bureaucratic politeness, but its implications were crystal clear. Her career, her freedom, and possibly her safety depended on her willingness to abandon the investigation. Despite the pressure, Sarah refused to back down. She had spent too many years fighting for justice to be intimidated by threats from powerful people. She informed the officials that she had already documented everything, and that silencing her would not make the evidence disappear. Her defiance clearly surprised the officials, who seemed to have expected immediate compliance. Meanwhile, Catherine was facing her own challenges. Her newspaper's legal team had conducted a review of the story and concluded that the potential liability from publishing allegations against the royal family was too great. The editor, who had initially been enthusiastic about the investigation, was now refusing to run any story without additional corroboration that seemed impossible to obtain. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, a former palace archivist who had worked closely with Diana's personal collection, contacted Catherine after hearing rumors about unusual activity surrounding the princess's belongings. Dr. Thornton had been dismissed from her position 6 months earlier under circumstances she had always found suspicious. Dr. Thornton revealed that she had been ordered to prepare detailed catalogs of Diana's personal items shortly before her dismissal. At the time, she had been told that the cataloging was part of a routine archival project. However, she now realized that her work had been used to facilitate the auction operation. She had copies of all the catalogs she had prepared, providing definitive proof of what items were in the palace's possession and documentation of their subsequent disappearance. The doctor's evidence was devastating. Her catalog showed that hundreds of Diana's personal items had been systematically removed from official palace collections. The items included not just clothing and jewelry, but also personal correspondence, photographs, and documents that had significant historical value. Many of these pieces should have been preserved as part of the national heritage. Dr. Thornton also provided evidence of pressure she had faced to alter her catalogs to hide the removal of certain items. She had been asked to reclassify some pieces as damaged beyond repair or lost to deterioration, creating paper trails that would explain their absence without revealing that they had actually been sold. Her refusal to falsify these records had led directly to her dismissal. Armed with Dr. Thornton's evidence, Sarah and Catherine decided to take their story directly to the public through social media and independent news platforms that were less susceptible to pressure from the royal family's legal team. They prepared a comprehensive presentation of their findings, including photographs, documents, and recorded conversations that would be difficult for anyone to dismiss or discredit. The story broke on a Tuesday morning when Catherine published her article on a popular independent news website. Within hours, the revelations about Camilla's role in auctioning Diana's belongings had spread across social media platforms worldwide. The public reaction was immediate and intense, with millions of people expressing outrage at what they saw as a betrayal of Diana's memory. The royal family's initial response was predictably defensive. A spokesman issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and claiming that all of Diana's belongings were being preserved according to proper protocols. However, the specific evidence that Sarah and Catherine had presented made these denials increasingly difficult to maintain. James Harrison emerged from hiding with a dramatic revelation of his own. He had been detained by palace security for 2 days and subjected to intense questioning about his activities. During his detention, he had been offered a substantial financial settlement in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. His refusal to accept the offer had led to threats against his family, forcing him to seek protection from law enforcement. James's account of his treatment provided additional evidence of the lengths to which Camilla's team was willing to go to protect their operation. The fact that a loyal palace employee had been threatened for trying to expose wrongdoing demonstrated the corrupt nature of the entire enterprise. The story gained additional credibility when Prince William issued a carefully worded statement expressing his concern about reports regarding his mother's belongings. While he stopped short of directly accusing anyone of wrongdoing, his statement made it clear that he had not authorized any sales of Diana's personal items and was demanding a full investigation into the matter. Public pressure mounted rapidly as more details emerged about the scope of the auction operation. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace carrying signs demanding Camilla's resignation. Online petitions calling for her removal from the royal family gathered millions of signatures within days. The scandal was dominating news coverage not just in Britain but around the world. The financial markets began reacting to the crisis as well. Companies that had partnerships with the royal family saw their stock prices decline as investors worried about association with the scandal. Tourism organizations expressed concern about the potential impact on Britain's image as a destination for visitors interested in royal history. International reaction was particularly damaging. Diana had been beloved worldwide, and the revelation that her memory was being commercialized by the woman many blamed for destroying her marriage struck a chord with people far beyond British borders. Foreign media outlets that had always been fascinated by the royal family were now focusing intensively on this scandal. As the crisis deepened, it became clear that this was more than just a financial scandal or a breach of protocol. The systematic exploitation of Diana's legacy represented a fundamental corruption of the values that the royal family claimed to embody. The institution that was supposed to be above such behavior had been revealed to be engaged in activities that would be considered criminal if committed by ordinary citizens. The revelations about Camilla's auction operation sent shockwaves through the highest levels of government and the royal establishment. Prime Minister's office was inundated with calls from foreign leaders seeking clarification about the scandal. The crisis threatened to undermine Britain's soft power and diplomatic relationships that had taken decades to build. King Charles found himself in an impossible position. His wife stood accused of systematically destroying his first wife's legacy for personal profit. The evidence was overwhelming, but acknowledging it would mean admitting that the woman he had chosen as queen was capable of extraordinary cruelty and greed. Palace advisors worked around the clock to develop damage control strategies, but the scale of the scandal made traditional crisis management techniques ineffective. The investigation expanded rapidly as law enforcement agencies realized they were dealing with potential violations of multiple laws. The Crown Prosecution Service opened a formal inquiry into possible fraud, theft, and money laundering charges. International authorities began examining whether any of the auction proceeds had crossed borders in ways that violated financial regulations. Catherine Mills and her newspaper found themselves at the center of one of the biggest stories in modern British history. The initial article had generated millions of readers and spawned dozens of follow-up investigations. Other journalists began examining different aspects of the royal family's finances, uncovering additional irregularities that suggested the Diana auction was part of a broader pattern of financial misconduct. The public's reaction grew more intense as additional details emerged about which specific items had been sold. When news broke that Camilla had auctioned off a locket containing pictures of young William and Harry that Diana had worn daily, public outrage reached new heights. The symbolism was devastating, the stepmother literally profiting from selling away the mother's most treasured connection to her children. James Harrison became a reluctant public figure as media outlets competed to interview the whistleblower who had exposed the scandal. His detailed accounts of the auction operation's inner workings provided crucial corroboration for the other evidence. Despite receiving death threats and facing financial hardship after losing his palace position, James continued to speak publicly about what he had witnessed. The international art market reacted swiftly to the scandal. Several auction houses issued statements distancing themselves from any involvement in selling royal memorabilia without proper authorization. Private collectors who had purchased Diana items through the secret auctions found themselves in legal jeopardy. As authorities began investigating whether they had knowingly bought stolen property, Dr. Elizabeth Thornton's role in the investigation proved crucial, as she provided detailed technical evidence about the palace's inventory systems. Her catalogs demonstrated conclusively that the royal family's official records had been systematically falsified to hide the removal of Diana's belongings. This evidence transformed the scandal from allegations of improper sales into documented proof of institutional fraud. The crisis deepened when recordings surfaced of Camilla discussing the auction operation with foreign buyers. In one particularly damaging conversation, she could be heard laughing about Diana's pathetic sentimentality while negotiating the sale of personal letters Diana had written to her sons. The callousness displayed in these recordings shocked even Camilla's supporters and made her position increasingly untenable. Prince William's response to the crisis became a crucial factor in determining its outcome. While he maintained public dignity befitting his position, sources close to the prince revealed his private fury about the desecration of his mother's memory. His decision to cooperate with law enforcement investigations sent a clear signal that the royal family could not protect Camilla from the consequences of her actions. The financial investigation revealed that the auction operation had generated over £15 million in just 2 years. The money had been distributed through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts that seemed designed to hide the ultimate beneficiaries. Forensic accountants working for law enforcement agencies began the painstaking process of tracing these funds and identifying everyone who had profited from the scheme. Palace staff members began coming forward with their own accounts of suspicious activities they had witnessed. Security guards reported unusual late-night movements of vehicles and packages. Administrative staff described pressure to alter records and ignore irregularities. The cumulative effect of these testimonies painted a picture of an institution that had been corrupted from within. The scandal's impact extended beyond the immediate participants to affect the broader concept of monarchy in modern Britain. Public opinion polls showed unprecedented levels of support for abolishing the royal system entirely. The idea that the Queen herself was engaged in such unseemly commercial exploitation of a beloved figure's memory challenged fundamental assumptions about royal dignity and integrity. International media coverage focused heavily on the contrast between Diana's charitable work and humanitarian legacy versus Camilla's commercial exploitation of that legacy. The irony that money from selling Diana's belongings was being used to fund public relations campaigns designed to improve Camilla's image was particularly noted by commentators worldwide. The investigation uncovered evidence that some of the most historically significant items had been sold to buyers in countries with questionable human rights records. A personal letter from Diana to Nelson Mandela had been purchased by a regime known for suppressing political dissidents. The symbolic implications of this transaction, Diana's message of hope being owned by oppressors, epitomized the moral bankruptcy of the entire operation. As pressure mounted, several of Camilla's closest associates began distancing themselves from her. Staff members who had initially defended the auction operation as legitimate began changing their stories when faced with potential criminal prosecution. The solidarity that had initially protected Camilla began cracking as individual participants prioritized their own legal interests. The crisis reached a tipping point when a group of Diana's closest friends and charitable associates issued a joint statement condemning the auction operation and calling for Camilla's immediate removal from all royal duties. These individuals, who had remained largely silent about royal family matters for decades out of respect for William and Harry, felt compelled to speak out in defense of Diana's memory. The statement from Diana's friends included devastating personal anecdotes about how much her possessions had meant to her. They described specific items that had been sold and explained their emotional significance in Diana's life. Their insider knowledge made it impossible for anyone to claim that the sold items were merely random belongings with no special meaning. Parliament began facing pressure to intervene directly in the crisis. Several members called for formal investigations into the royal family's financial practices and questioned whether the monarchy's traditional immunity from legal scrutiny should continue in light of such serious allegations. The constitutional implications of holding a queen accountable for criminal behavior created unprecedented legal and political challenges. As the scandal entered its second month, it became clear that Camilla's position as queen was becoming increasingly untenable. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Public opinion had turned decisively against her, and even traditional royal supporters were beginning to acknowledge that her continued presence was damaging the institution beyond repair. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Camilla's fate, but the future direction of the British monarchy itself. The final act of the crisis began when King Charles was forced to choose between protecting his wife and preserving the monarchy itself. Behind closed doors at Windsor Castle, the most difficult conversation in modern royal history took place. Charles had to confront the undeniable evidence that Camilla had systematically betrayed everything the royal family claimed to represent. The meeting lasted for hours, with only Charles and Camilla present. Palace staff reported hearing raised voices and emotional exchanges throughout the evening. By dawn, the decision had been made. Camilla would be required to step down from all royal duties immediately and face whatever legal consequences awaited her. The monarchy's survival required this ultimate sacrifice. The announcement came through a carefully worded palace statement that managed to convey the gravity of the situation while attempting to preserve some dignity for the institution. Camilla was described as withdrawing from public life to address serious personal matters. The statement acknowledged irregularities in the handling of historical royal items and promised full cooperation with ongoing investigations. Within hours of the announcement, Camilla was escorted from Buckingham Palace by security personnel. The images of her departure, carrying only a small suitcase and avoiding eye contact with photographers, became symbolic of her dramatic fall from grace. The woman who had fought for decades to become queen had lost everything in a matter of weeks. The criminal investigation moved swiftly once Camilla's royal protection was removed. Search warrants were executed at multiple properties associated with her and her associates. Investigators seized computers, financial records, and additional evidence of the auction operation's scope. The lack of royal immunity meant that law enforcement could pursue the case with the same vigor they would apply to any other criminal enterprise. James Harrison found himself thrust into an unexpected role as a key witness in what was being called the trial of the century. His testimony about the systematic nature of the auction operation provided crucial evidence for prosecutors building their case. Despite the personal cost he had paid for coming forward, James expressed satisfaction that Diana's memory was finally being protected from further exploitation. Dr. Elizabeth Thornton's documentation proved instrumental in establishing the scope of the theft. Her catalogs provided precise inventories that made it impossible for anyone to claim ignorance about which items had been removed illegally. The scientific precision of her record-keeping transformed what could have been vague allegations into specific, provable charges. Sarah Mitchell received recognition for her investigation, but she found little satisfaction in the accolades. The case had consumed months of her life and exposed her to threats and pressure, unlike anything she had experienced. However, she took pride in knowing that her work had helped preserve the integrity of Diana's legacy and demonstrated that no one, regardless of their position, was above the law. Catherine Mills won numerous journalism awards for her coverage of the scandal, but she too was changed by the experience. The story had shown her both the best and worst of human nature, from James's courage in exposing wrongdoing to Camilla's callous exploitation of a dead woman's memory. She continued investigating royal family finances, uncovering additional irregularities that suggested the Diana auction was just one part of a larger pattern of misconduct. The international legal ramifications of the case proved complex and far-reaching. Several countries launched their own investigations into whether items sold to their citizens had been stolen property. Some nations began reviewing their extradition treaties with Britain in light of questions about the royal family's legal immunity. The scandal had diplomatic consequences that extended far beyond Britain's borders. Prince William emerged from the crisis with enhanced public standing. His willingness to support the investigation despite personal cost demonstrated a commitment to justice that resonated with the British public. Many saw his actions as evidence that the next generation of royals would operate according to different standards than their predecessors. The trial itself became a media sensation that dominated international news coverage for months. Camilla's defense team argued that she had been advised by palace lawyers that the sales were legal, but prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence that she knew her actions were wrong. The recorded conversations in which she mocked Diana while negotiating sales proved particularly damaging to her case. The evidence presented during the trial revealed the full scope of Camilla's betrayal. Beyond the financial theft, prosecutors demonstrated that she had systematically worked to undermine Diana's legacy and influence. The auction operation was just one component of a broader campaign to diminish Diana's memory and ensure that Camilla's own reputation would not be forever overshadowed by her predecessor. When the verdict was announced, Camilla was found guilty on multiple charges including fraud, theft, and money laundering. The judge's sentencing remarks noted the particular cruelty of exploiting a dead woman's memory for personal gain. Camilla received a substantial prison sentence that effectively ended any possibility of her returning to public life. The recovery of Diana's belongings became a complex international effort. Many items had been sold to collectors who were willing to return them once they learned of their illegal status. However, some pieces had disappeared into private collections whose owners refused to cooperate with authorities. The effort to reunite Diana's possessions with their rightful place in British royal history continued long after the trial. Ended King Charles faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding the monarchy's reputation after the scandal. Public opinion polls showed historically low levels of support for the royal family, with many Britons questioning whether the institution could survive such a fundamental betrayal of trust. Charles's efforts to reform royal finances and increase transparency were seen as necessary but insufficient responses to the crisis. The Diana auction scandal fundamentally changed how the British public viewed their royal family. The idea that the monarchy was somehow above the corruption and greed that affected other institutions had been permanently shattered. Future generations of royals would have to earn public trust rather than simply inherit it. James Harrison eventually found new employment with a security firm that specialized in protecting cultural heritage sites. His experience with the royal scandal had given him unique insights into how valuable collections could be protected from internal threats. He became a sought-after consultant for museums and private collectors, who wanted to ensure their own items would never face similar exploitation. The case established important legal precedents about royal accountability and the protection of national heritage. Parliament passed new laws specifically designed to prevent the unauthorized sale of royal memorabilia and other historically significant items. The legislation included severe penalties for anyone who attempted to profit from such sales. Years later, as the dust settled from the scandal, the true cost of Camilla's actions became clear. Beyond the immediate criminal charges and political consequences, she had damaged the institution of monarchy in ways that might never be fully repaired. Her betrayal of Diana's memory had reminded the world that even those who claim the highest moral authority are capable of the lowest forms of human behavior. The empty spaces in royal collections where Diana's belongings once resided served as permanent reminders of what had been lost. While some items were eventually recovered and returned to their proper places, others remained scattered around the world in private collections. The physical dismantling of Diana's legacy had been stopped, but the damage to her memory and to the royal family's reputation would endure for generations to come.